Welcome to episode 3 of Tracing the Rails. I'm here in Steyning, the town that the railway line was named after. I'm actually standing right on the path of the old railway line, which, as you can see, is now a road. An A road, the A283, the Steyning bypass. With the decline of the railway, it meant that Steyning town finally got its long-awaited bypass. So, was the closure of the railway a good thing? Let's find out as we continue to trace those rails.
Winding through the heart of Sussex.
Welcome to episode 3 of Tracing the Rails. We're starting off this episode at Castle Lane Level Crossing in Steyning. If you're not sure where we are, let's check out the map. We start our episode at the Castle Lane crossing just north of Bramber. Following the bypass that replaced our line and passing under the footbridge and road bridge, we steam into Steyning Station and have a good route around the ruins. We explore the railway cottages which stand original on site. Hello. Then we explore Glebe Farm, a place that had been integral to the Steyning station for years. Mike will explore the station market area in depth, including the auctions, railway hotels and the converted buildings in that area. And then you will rejoin me as we look at the historical significance of the White Horse Hotel in the centre of Steyning. On the way back to our green line, we will be making a short stop at the wonderful Steyning Museum to see some treasures there. Then we sadly start to depart Steyning Station and travel along the road again. Soon curving away to the east and leaving the road behind, we approach a hidden nature reserve with some of its own little gems to discover. Passing over a section of railway that was once in a deep cutting and has since been landfilled, we come across an unusual and stumpy looking bridge, which may have more legs to it than you think. And then another bridge, but wait, where is it? Finally clear of the town, we start a slightly longer leg of walking with lots of countryside, but sadly fewer railway remains. This part of the path is still off the Downs link, so you'll need permission to explore here. We then explore the rumours of a missing station. Passing more lovely views and expansive farm crops, we rejoin the Downslink path again, right at the point where there is a World War II bunker with a railway connection to explore. And a last push through the country to the end of our episode at the second river crossing of the line over the Ada. So, to recap, these are the places we'll be visiting in this episode. Let's start our episode at Castle Lane in Steyning. Now, you might think it's rather odd that we're starting episode 3 by a level crossing that isn't even here. We're standing at the side of the road, but Castle Lane is pretty important. It's one of the routes that connected Bramber and Steyning. And of course, instead of a railway line, it's now a busy road, as you can hear from all the traffic. If you're being really keen to find out exactly where the railway lines were, they're pretty much here, where the pavement currently is. But as you head north towards Steyning, it will follow the path of the road more accurately. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is that I've just walked up from Bramber, and it hasn't taken very long, because the two stations really aren't that far apart. In fact, if you're driving, you'll cover the distance in around a minute or so. Now, referring to my dad's trusty old Ordnance Survey map and a ruler, which I happen to have conveniently in my pocket, I've worked out that on this scale, the two stations are 16 millimetres apart, which, looking at the scale, is just over half a mile, about 5/8 of a mile. Now, why would they build two stations so close together? Steyning, of course, is the major town along the route. It's got a large population, it's got a market, it's where the locos filled up with water. But as we discovered in part 2, Bramber was an important tourist destination, so it warranted having two stations very close together. Castle Lane was also very important as the connecting road between Bramber and Steyning over there. We're going to speak to some people to find out more about this in just a moment. But one final thing to point out to you, if you're following the Downslink footpath, at this point, you don't follow the railway anymore, you have to diverge off. I'm now joined by Chris Rogers, who has got some fantastic family connections to the old Steyning Line. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
So tell me a little bit about your railway ancestry.
My grandfather was the station master in Steyning up until 1951, and sadly died of a heart attack over Christmas that year. And my father lived in the station, and I guess his brother must have been somewhere around as well in the station. And eventually, because of my grandfather's death, my grandmother had to move to the railway cottage here, and she was responsible for opening the gate for traffic.
Wow. So where your grandmother used to live in the station master's house, of course, when your grandfather died, she was effectively evicted.
Yes.
But they found her a replacement, which would have been around here then.
It's across the road.
Across the road.
Cottage, yes.
That's now no longer there.
Yes.
So what were your grandmother's duties then?
Well, she was responsible for opening the gate to traffic. So she had to push the gate open.
Yes.
And push the gate shut. And I don't know how she did it without a telephone, or maybe she just had a timetable and somebody drew up and handed her horn, and then she knew she had to do something.
Gosh.
I never thought to ask her.
No.
I wish I had.
Yes.
But she did tell me that was her job anyway.
Now, one thing, Chris, I will ask you, because you would have been quite young then. We have had a few instances of mischievous behaviour from young boys in particular with railway lines. Did you get up to any mischief with the railways?
Oh yeah, well, I know what you're angling at, but it was on the way home from school. I would always try and get a stone down the funnel of the train as it went under the bridge.
Did you succeed?
Yes.
You did?
Every time.
Oh.
I thought I did anyway, but they weren't big stones, only very small, but...
Just little bits of shingle.
Yeah, and I didn't see anything wrong with it at the time either.
So if in your family there was a railway engineer and you remember stories about damage to the boilers because of stones being dropped, here's your culprit. Not to worry. Chris, one final thing. The railway was removed and closed in 1966. What do you remember about that?
Well, I can't remember the tracks being ripped up, but I remember at one stage balancing along the line, walking along the rails. Some guy, because I used to play with the different children around in the area, and I remember some guy coming down and taking the slates off the roof and being told by my mother the following week someone had stolen the roof from the station.
So you witnessed a crime but didn't realise?
No, I didn't realise. The guy said to me, he said, "We use them for slates for children to write," and he pulled out a piece of chalk and scratched across the top of the slate.
Wow. Well, Chris Rogers, thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Well, Ian, can I thank you very much for escorting me safely across the road there?
It's absolutely fine, Stephen. I was actually on my way to work, so, you know, it's absolutely a pleasure.
And your work is clearly related to this splendid outfit that you're wearing.
Yep, this is an outfit from the Victorian days. This would be typical of what the London and Brighton and South Coast Railway would be wearing. So any porter on the platform, any of the stations would be wearing this uniform of the Steyning Line.
Fantastic, that's great to know. Now we're actually on Castle Lane on the Steyning side, and this was quite a key route, wasn't it, for the people of Steyning and also Bramber,
Yes.
the other side of the line?
Absolutely, yes, it was. Mostly foot traffic would come this way, but sometimes there would be motor vehicles coming through Bramber as well. Cars, lorries, vans, but it did get quite busy at times. And then the railway came along and had permission to really just cut through the middle of the road. So, you know, that's when things changed.
So that was a real problem for this key route then between Bramber and Steyning. Suddenly the railway arrives.
Yes.
What happened then? How did they regulate this?
Well, what we have then is a level crossing. It can be for pedestrians, it can be for motor vehicles, but here, mostly for pedestrians, you have a gate either side, so there will be a gate just over there and another one on the other side of the road. Gate has a lamp on it, a red lamp, which would be closed to the side that was not actually approaching it, so we would have the people approaching to go across the other side of Castle Lane. Red light the other side, and when the way was open, when there were no trains running, then the light would be facing the trains coming down from Bramber or coming up from Bramber and coming down from Steyning.
And there were buildings here back then that aren't here anymore that were demolished as part of the road construction.
That's right.
Would they have had railway staff in them?
Yes, most likely the crossing gatekeeper would be situated there. They'd have a plan of what was running that day, and then they would make sure that they had the necessary information to open or shut the gates as was required, really.
Because if this wasn't here, it's a very long way round for pedestrians, isn't it? It would have added half an hour to their journey, at least, I would say.
Easily, or even on horseback or something like that, you know.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
No, it's level crossings, whether they be for pedestrians or motor vehicles, very essential.
Now, we have a very short clip on Cinefilm of this crossing. For some reason, there seem to be hardly any photographs of it, but some passengers took a Cinefilm on the train between Steyning and Bramber, and you can just get a brief glimpse of this crossing when it was operational, which is beautiful to see, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, you can actually see there was a crossing there.
Yeah.
Very important for the road.
And do you remember this when it was a railway?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah.
Looking out of the window, leaving Bramber, looking out of the window, as I did as a child, and thinking, right, Steyning is the next station up the line.
Not very far apart though, were they? We
Very
were talking
close.
about this just earlier, saying just over half a mile, so that you just get up a little bit of speed,
Yes.
and then you have to stop again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the locomotive will be pulling one, probably 2 or 3 coaches at the most, and then slacken off the regulator and then be pulling into Steyning.
Fabulous. Well, Ian, thank you very much.
That's a
Enjoy
pleasure.
your shift at the Bluebell Railway.
I must do that. Yeah,
Excellent.
I'll make sure I do. Thanks
Excellent.
very much
Cheers,
indeed,
Ian.
Stephen. Yeah, take care.
So here we are then in Steyning, which is about 4 miles north of Shoreham on the Steyning Line. Steyning was originally a market town with thriving breweries, a tannery and even a royal mint. With the arrival of the railways in 1861, it transformed the prosperity of the town. Dairy and horse farmers could move their livestock more easily, and the weekly cattle market and the annual horse fair were a real attraction for the town. Take a look at these old aerial pictures. You can see back then that Castle Lane wasn't much more than a track that connected Bramber to Steyning town. You can see the crossing guard's house and the road to the southeast side of the line, which wasn't even fully constructed. Now, of course, all this land has got bungalows on, making it a much bigger community than it ever was back then. Prior to the railways, Steyning's fortunes had risen and fallen. First mentioned in the story of St Cuthman's, the early settlement was based around a pre-9th century church. Later, in the 12th century, the Norman St Andrew's Church was built on the same site. Steyning developed into a prosperous town due to the fact that it had a harbour in the days before the river silted up and was diverted to create more farmland. Barges would carry a variety of goods to and from the town. The 1086 Domesday Book records show that Steyning was one of the largest populations in the southeast, and much of it was based around this church. However, in the 1400s, the Black Death decimated that population. This beautiful old building, built in 1614, used to be Steyning Grammar School. One of its former pupils from the 1920s was railway engineer Bernard Holden, who later went on to be creator and president of the Bluebell Railway. Another railway coincidence is that in 1912, he lived in the old station master's house for a number of years. By the 18th century, Steyning was an important stop on the coaching route between London and Brighton, and the Chequer Inn and the White Horse were both coaching inns. But that's enough about Steyning town for now. Let's go and explore the station. If, like that driver and me, you've driven down this bypass countless times, I bet you never realised there was ever a railway station here, because there are absolutely no clues as a driver that this was once a railway station, but there are still some signs. But in order to see them, you need to have a look in the bushes. So come on, let's take a look. Now, this is what I was talking about. I know I'm roughly in the right position for the old platforms because the station cottages are just up there at the top of this embankment, and those were there at the time of the railway and they haven't shifted. So looking at the maps and old photographs, I know that right here, this is the southbound platform of the old Steyning Line. One further clue is this wall. If we look back at the old photographs, you can see at the back of the platform that there was this wall that went along, and just up there, there is the old footbridge. So if you were standing on this platform in 1964 and you dropped your football, I found it. There are other clues as well, more serious ones, that we can discover by walking along here. Now, where we've had 60 years of the undergrowth pushing on this wall, you can see here that it really is on its way out. It's tipping right over. On its way out, it's tipping right over, and it's actually shedding a few bricks as well. This is LBC brick, London Brick Company, so possibly one used in the old wall. But another visual clue we can discover is this. Now here, the wall doglegs and goes up with this parapet, and the retaining wall becomes much higher. By looking at the photographs, you can see that the corner pillar of the old footbridge was right here. The footbridge went right up above me and over the double tracks to the other side, giving me further clues that I'm standing right on the platform. And it's beautiful to think, isn't it, that this wall was built in the 1860s. The original curved decorative wall tie is still there all these years later. Now, the thing I want to try and find is further along. Looking back at the old images, we can see that there was a building that was tied into the higher section of the retaining wall. And even though the building's gone, I'd like to see if there are any signs of it on the wall. However, it is rather bramble and nettle ridden, so it might be tricky to get through. I note that producer and the director have sent me into the brambles. Let's see if I can find it. So as I make my way through this undergrowth, it's making me think that this beautiful wall, which is 160 years old, probably hasn't been seen properly for decades. The last passenger who would have leant against this while they were waiting for their train, perhaps reading the newspaper of the day, would have had a good old look at this. But the platform, which is right below me, of course, has long gone. But the thing I'm looking for is the building that would have projected out from here. So I'm actually on the platform. Right up there we can see the cottages, and this wall, this retaining wall, is holding back tons of ground that's been there for so many decades, still doing its job, which is an absolute credit to the craftsman who built this beautiful wall, which is still in this position in perfect condition. Now up here, there's the corner I was looking for. This is the end of the wall in its current position, so I know that right behind me would have been the waiting room on the southbound platform. But for all those decades, people would have sat here waiting for the train. But now it's all gone, just the brambles and the nettles. But it's still wonderful to know that there are a few lurking traces of the old buildings.
If somebody said they want to pull down a beautiful house in the old part of town, made of Victorian timber and glass, the whole of the town would be making a fuss. Now sadly I say the damage is done to thousands of buildings like this in my song. Made to work signals, usher trains past, all up memories of timber and glass. If somebody said they want to pull down a beautiful house in the old part of town, made of Victorian timber and glass, the whole of the town would be making a fuss. If somebody said they want to pull down a beautiful house in the old part of town, made of Victorian timber and glass, the whole of the town would be making a fuss.
Looking back at old photographs of Steyning show that the railway was really a very significant part of the town. A lot of key buildings were situated very near to the railway line itself. This fantastic photograph was taken from above, and it shows the position of many buildings that are sadly no longer with us. Of course, the railway's been gone for around 60 years now, which means we got 6 decades of tree growth, which is concealing my view of where these buildings would have once been. Down here, however, this is the path of the old railway line itself, and the station building is on the right-hand side that we saw earlier in the episode. The old railway cottages are over there, and that grey bungalow is on the site of the old laundry. Now, of course, with the railway having been gone for nearly 60 years, it means we've got 6 decades worth of growth with all these trees. So some of these things are actually quite difficult to see. On this side, we had the old market, which Mike will be exploring later in the episode. It's also where the trains took on coal and water. And up there we had the railway hotel. If I cross over the road and look southbound down the old line, we can take a look at the old inn. And the old railway inn was on the right-hand side over here. This view is southbound down the line towards Bramber. And what we have to remember, of course, is when the railway line was first built, it was only a single track, but due to the popularity, they added the second line around 20 years later. I wonder what the view would be like if I could stand on a bridge very much like this one when the railway line first opened. It must have been a fantastic sight. Now I've made my way onto a footbridge which is quite a few hundred metres south of the road bridge we were looking at just now, still along the path of the old railway line. When they removed the tracks, the empty trackbed was left in place for a while and Anders took some photographs, and once again we're very grateful to him for sharing them with us here at Tracing the Rails. Now the promised bus link was somewhere over there on that side of the road. You can't really see it from here anymore because it's so overgrown. Now it looks like there's an embankment the whole way between these two bridges, but in actual fact the warehouse which is over there is level with the road. You just can't see it because of all these trees. Now over there by the road bridge was the old station building, and you can see in these photos there were some steps that took people down onto the platforms. Now the building of course is long gone. The steps however are still there, but it's so overgrown and they're partially in someone's garden, so unfortunately we can't show you those. The alternative bus service was poor. There were not enough buses, they were often late, and they eventually stopped running. People who travelled into and out of Steyning stopped doing so, and the market trading dried up very quickly. Then the diggers moved in. They took away everything on the west side of the station except for the goods warehouse, which was later converted, and all they left behind was 2 sets of steps. Do you know, it's such a shame that there are so few surviving buildings of the old Steyning station and the environment around it. So if you're like me, trying to walk the old railway line along the Downs link, you really have to use a lot of imagination and perhaps do some research by looking at photographs to find out exactly where you are. What I do know, however, is that the original station cottages are still here, and they should be down this little lane just ahead of me. Now, as I walk there, what was originally on my right was the old laundry, and it was quite a distinctive building because it had an enormous chimney that you can see on some of these pictures. Now, soon after the railway was here, the big industrial laundry disappeared, and in its place are some of these houses. Now, let's talk about those cottages, which I can now see right ahead of me. Originally, they were built at the same time as the railway station itself, and they were used to house senior railway staff. But as time went on, it ended up that anyone working for the railway could end up living there. Now, of course, those bungalows or those houses are still there, but they're private property, so sadly we can't take a look. There was one other building that does fascinate me, and that was the station master's cottage. Now, that was on the other side of the line, actually adjacent to the station building itself. Now, whether you could get to the house to the station directly, I don't know. I don't know how many rooms it had as well, but there is an interesting story about one of the station masters, a man called Albert Tupper. Now, apparently, and rather ironically, he was rather overwhelmed by the whole railway thing. And on his first day in office, he found the noise and the crowds and the hustle and bustle a bit overwhelming. So he retreated into his office and locked himself in. So when the first train arrived, there were rather awkward knocks at the door, a lot of sheepish banging and trying to unlock it. And eventually he came out. He ended up with the nickname of the man who locked himself away, which is rather unfortunate, but despite that, he ended up having a long and fruitful career on the railways. And here they are then, look, the old railway cottages. one of the last few surviving buildings. By 1912, the station master appointed by the London Brighton South Coast Railway was Charles Holden, father of the president of the Bluebell Railway, Bernard Holden, who we mentioned earlier, and he lived at the station master's house. So this is where Chris Rogers' grandfather Morris is buried, here at St Andrew's Church in Steyning. Morris Rogers worked for the Royal Engineers on the railways during the Great War, and after that he ended up working at Steyning railway station, where he was proud to be their station master. Now, we're not here out of morbid curiosity. We're here to show that back then people were a lot more loyal to their profession. They didn't change jobs like we tend to these days. And it's also very common for them to be born, grow up and ultimately die in the same town. Very fitting, in fact, that the Steyning Station Master is the first line on his gravestone, showing how important it was to Morris. I'm joined by lovely Patricia.
Hello, Steve.
And you've lived in Steyning a long time, haven't you?
Yes, since I was 7, since 1949.
So
Yes.
the railways were still in full swing
Absolutely,
at the time.
because before we moved down here, we used to come down by train from Peckham, from Rye Lane, and then come to, I think we had to change at Horsham, and then come straight through to Steyning.
Gosh.
So I've used them all my life up until 1966.
So we're on Station Road then,
yes.
that leads up to the
station.
station that's not there anymore.
No, which is sad.
So
yes.
this road then, was this quite a busy thoroughfare?
It was because of the market on the left-hand side. You know, that was every Wednesday. So all the lorries would come, and then all the cattle and animals would all come down by train.
It's quite a big area, isn't it?
It was huge, a very, very big area. And also they filmed Mr. Drake's Duck.
Mr. Drake's Duck.
Yes.
Now, we did a Sidings episode about this. Do you remember that being filmed?
I certainly do. I have a photograph whereas I was standing on the pigsties with my friends after school watching it being filmed. Yes, it was really exciting times.
Did you get any autographs?
No, I didn't.
Oh,
no,
what a
unfortunately,
shame.
I didn't.
No.
But yes, and so we used to come up every day to go to work on the trains. We had to go by train, and then I'd go to Henfield on the train every Saturday.
It was a big part of your life
was.
and your routine.
It was, up until 66, yes.
Now, as we walk nearer to the site of the old station, there are some steps here.
Yes, they've been there for, well, even when I was a child. We used to love running up and down with those all the time.
So those took you from the station area up to the houses, and there was an old hotel.
Yeah,
wasn't
the railway
there? You mentioned
hotel.
The railway hotel.
And that's where the farmers used to come and have their pints.
Gosh, there was a cattle market and a furniture market.
Yes, they used to auction off the cattle, and as I say, Mr. Brooks, the local butcher,
Gosh.
so that used to slaughter them in the back.
Ooh.
You know.
Awkward.
Yeah.
So
And then
the
there were
houses up there are the original. The hotel's
Yes.
no longer there.
No.
Yeah.
And then we used to come down every day to catch the train to work.
Now I can hear the road. It's just the other side of this building in the cutting. That is where the tracks were then.
Yes, absolutely.
Now here's a big question for you. 1966, the road wasn't there, but the railway line was. But then it went.
Yes, yeah, that was awful because we used it every day to go to work. So because the buses only run every hour, I had to learn to drive.
What
Yes.
would you rather have now? Your bypass or the trains?
Oh, the trains, definitely, because I used it all the time, and most people did.
I'm standing right where the sidings and marketplace were when the Steyning Line was running. Now, up and down the track, different stations became known for different things. So you could trade horses at West Grinstead. There was bricks sold out of Southwater. Further down the track, you've got Bramber, where there were the flowers, as we discussed earlier in the series. And then, obviously, the cement from the cement works at Beeding Sidings. But here, in Steyning, well, they literally traded everything. It was as if the river port had come back from ages past, and Steyning grasped that opportunity with both hands. The industry, the bustle, the hustle, the atmosphere here must have been incredible. And look at it now. Absolutely silent. So, I mean, I'm standing pretty much in a cattle pen at the moment. The only thing you can see behind me, the white building there, which was the auction house. Then beyond that, the goods yard, well, the goods shed rather, that was connected to a dock which ran parallel to the auction house, and that would have had animal pens in it. Carrying on that way round, we had Steyning Station Front. Steyning Town Centre, I'm looking straight at it. Of course, the market wasn't just about trade sales. It was also a social event. After they concluded their business, farmers, local people, tradesfolk would often head to the pub for a cheeky drink. Now, this legacy continued for generations, with Steyning becoming one of the most significant markets in Sussex. Mrs. Edith Cooper, a lady known for her sharp business acumen and the quality of her produce, used to make apple bread, which apparently is rumoured to have been a firm favourite with the station staff.
Now, it's always lovely to capture memories of people who actually use the Steyning Line. And I'm here actually in Steyning with the delightful Joy, who's going to share her memories of using the railway line back in the 1960s and beyond. So you were telling me just a little earlier that you actually moved to Steyning in 1964. So a couple of years before the railway closed. What do you remember about those 2 years of having the railway station just down the road?
Yes, it was quite well used, though. I can remember it being, quite crowded. You got to know the different people that came on at different times and things,
So, Joy, you lived in Steyning in 1966, which is an important year for the railway, because the railway stopped working. What do you remember about those times?
If I wanted to go to Brighton or anywhere, I got the bus because it was at the bottom of the road, so I didn't use it a lot then. But
so for you,
I certainly remember it.
Wasn't much of a loss then, perhaps?
No, not really, no.
Regular viewers of Tracing the Rails will recognise the next two gentlemen who will be talking to me from our credits, Lawrence Tebbs and Graham Tebbs. And I'm delighted to be joined by them now. Lawrence, Graham, good morning. What's your earliest memories of the marketplace and the Steyning Line?
It began when the family moved to Steyning in 1955. My father took up a small holding at the foot of the Downs, just the other side of Steyning town, and he bought stock from the market, and as the farm developed he also sold stock at the market.
Time off from school, you come down to the market with your dad and help him run the stall, presumably if he was selling, yeah?
Everything was sold by auction, so livestock was put into pens, and then the auctioneer would start number one, work through the lots. For several people interested, the price would rise.
Mm-hmm. And how did your dad get? Did he have like a trailer and tractor, or because I think
mostly in the car?
In the car.
Well, yeah.
Special pens on this side of the goods yard for livestock. So there was a complete siding set up for cattle wagons, so that cattle, sheep, pigs
could be loaded in and taken away
by train.
Wow. What was a typical day at the market like? I mean, for you guys?
Well, it could be almost a whole day experience. The whole area would be busy all day.
So the steps being pretty much all that's left of what once was a full, complete railway line. What do you miss most about Steyning or the vibrant old market days?
The trains.
In May 1962, the goods yard at Steyning closed for the final time. As followed a few years later by Shoreham Goods Yard in 1965, neither to carry trade by rail ever again. Now, all we're left with is the shadows of the past.
Where shall we go this nice sunny day? Pack up a picnic, we're on the road. Let's head for some steam trains. Check out the map and are off and away.
A farmer's blind and Kent is such as the
Where are we going to find this steam train?
A farmer's blind and Kent is such as the
town is fine. Only a minute away from the shops. Then we will see a loco simmering ready to take us aboard. Off down the track, whistle as we go. Past the wooden signal box, down a woody steep path, into the engine crew on the way back.
A farmer's blind in Kent, Sussex, the
From the crossing, then our first stop, siding the loops soon found. The station, water tower, signals, engine sheds, coal. Look for the bright-built Terrier tank out on the plains. Watery scenes abound. Ganders, duck and herons and swans. Soon we see the cows and sheep and copse and bushes and meadows and corn. Clickety clack, the ball, the jack, the Meritage Johnson Wood. This is how it used to be. This is how it should be. And Bowling Castle's increasingly near. Bundy and road, time to hop out. Time to ramble off the pub. Why not picnic gears? Bowling Castle tempted his stairs.
A farmer's blind in Kent, the farmer's blind for me. A farmer's blind in Kent, the farmer's blind for me.
Now, of course, in Steyning, there are no surviving signal boxes, no surviving station buildings. So to find out what life was like in a signal box, who better to speak to than someone who used to work there? Hello, Bob.
Hello, Steve.
Lovely to meet you.
And
Now,
you.
you were a signal...
No, not a signalman, a porter signalman.
A porter signalman.
Yeah, which is subtle difference.
Porter signalman at Steyning
Correct.
Signal Box. What was life like there?
It was a country station, you knew everybody. As a porter signalman, you did all the jobs, signalling, booking office, platform, the lamps, and anything else. Postmen coming with their luggage, people with their parcels to and fro. And you knew all the local people and you chatted to them, police come down and talk to you.
Which was your favourite shift, do you think?
Oh, they was all favourite because everything was different every day. Nothing was the same. Things would happen. The railway life is always the same, but it's not. Different things happen every day. You knew who was going to come down, the postman was going to come down at set times. The people that was going to come to market on a Wednesday, you knew who they were. You knew the local P-way gangs. You knew the signal and telegraph. The police had come down during the day because it was one of their calling points. They pop in, get the tea on, have a cup of tea with them.
Now, of course, I was a policeman, so having a tea stop was a very important thing.
Oh, yes.
What about tea and meals and things? Did you manage to cook in the signal box
No.
on your little stove?
You had a stove, you had one of the old ranges, but you didn't really cook. You had sandwiches sort of thing, you toasted sandwiches, and it was like you had meals on the hoof. You know, whenever you could, you'd grab a cup of tea or someone would say, tea, right, and have it.
Unless a train interrupted what you were doing.
Then you might get the crew might say, get a phone call and say, get the kettle on, we want some hot water.
Of course, the railway line shut in 1966. What happened to your career then?
I then went to, because there was a lot of, what can I say, alterations within the railway, I ended up going as a shunter at West Worthing. And then after a while I got a position at New Haven Harbour as a signalman, and then my career took off from there. I come to other signal boxes, and I went into Hove Haven, our signal box. I went into the control, and then I went into the inspectorate after that.
And I see from your jacket, railways are still a part of your life.
Yes, so I belong to a miniature railway now. Infield Miniature Railway is a private railway. It's called place Infield Manor, with children with cerebral palsy, so we run trains up there for them.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what was working life like in the Steyning signal box? Were you a good employee?
Well, that I wouldn't know. Someone else would have to tell me if I was good or bad.
Funny you should say that. Bob, as a little bit of surprise for you, we've got a special guest. Jim, come on in.
Oh, woman-eck.
This is Jim Gibbons, and he was your manager.
Hi, Bob.
Hello, Jim. Nice to see you.
I asked Bob what he was like as an employee. Perhaps you can tell me.
Well, I actually didn't know Bob as a signalman. He came to me as an inspector, traffic inspector. And one of the things I used to say to my people on the railway, don't tell me any lies, you tell me the truth. If any lies need to be told about something or untruths, I'll do that.
Yeah,
of course, Bob came up with, straight away with, told me everything. And it's a matter of trust.
That's good, wonderful. And did you work on the Steyning Line at all in your career?
Well, only once. Really, years before I met Bob, I was a clerk in an office that dealt with stores. And when the line was shown for closure, one of my jobs was to go down the line, see the station master, and decide what we needed to recover from the stations.
Right. Now I'm inside Steyning Museum and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Woodfield, who is the curator of exhibitions at the museum.
Welcome.
Hi Andrew, thank you for letting me come and have a look round. Now of course Steyning is one of the stations along the line where there's very little surviving evidence outside on the street, but happily here at the museum we have got some treats for us to all look at. And the first thing, Andrew, that caught my eye is this amazing sign, the Southern Steyning Station sign. I understand this was on the original building.
This was originally on the entrance to Steyning Station, and a local resident salvaged it when it was demolished. Prior to that, of course, it would have been the London-Brighton South Coast Railway sign.
And going back further in time, we've got this amazing piece down here. Is that...
This is normally behind glass, I must say that.
Yeah.
We've removed the glazing for this occasion.
So this says London Brighton South Coast, number 62, emergency box. Tell me what this is.
It's the actual emergency box from the signal cabin, which was donated by the Steyning Red Cross in January 1913. We actually have within it the actual sign of the gift from the Red Cross to the London Brighton South Coast Railway. It would have been absolutely full of bandages and tinctures and all that sort of thing. And in those days, of course, things like bandages would be reused. They would be boiled to make them safe again to use, as would any instruments within it.
Yeah. Happily, things have improved in the last 100 odd years. I'm noticing some photographs here of some steam locos, and one has caught my eye because it actually has the name Steyning on the side.
There were quite a few locomotives of this sort that were named after various places on the line. In 1913, it was transferred to Battersea engine shed and never ran on the Steyning line again. It was a Class D3, which were used on the passenger trains, and the last Class D3 ran in 1956, actually hauling the Steyning line train on its very last thing before it was broken up for scrap.
And who knows if that metal lives on in something else today.
Who knows?
Now this is a depiction of a typical suburban train then from about the turn of the 18th into the 19th century. And I noticed the little 060 loco. And I remember when Dapol, the model railway company, issued this, and there was a clamour of people after it. Why is this such a special loco?
It was known as a terrier because when it puffed, it sounded like a terrier dog barking.
How lovely. Now, we asked Andrew to provide one exhibit that was a special thing for him, and I'm pleased to say it's right above us, isn't it?
Original gas lamp from Steyning Station.
From Steyning Station as well.
It hung over the platform.
Wow. So you've got the brochure here?
Yes. Now, what's amazing about this, it was made by a firm called Suggs in Crawley, and they are still in existence.
Wow, look at this.
Making actual lamps like this.
The name with tradition to uphold.
Yeah. And of course they make them for the railways of today, like the Bluebell line, for instance.
So if I wanted to buy one of these for my house, I could possibly do it.
You could indeed.
It's given me an idea. If you're in Steyning, make sure you pop into the museum.
Steyning, with its picturesque buildings and charming streets, has formed the backdrop of many films over the years. The town's unique character has appealed to directors who chose to make their films right here. One of the earliest films to capture Steyning's High Street was the silent film The Mayor of Casterbridge back in 1921. Produced by the Progress Film Company of Shoreham-by-Sea, who were actually based in Bungalow Town. They would later go on to become the Shoreham Film Studios. Moving forward to 1930, Steyning once again found itself in the spotlight in the sound comedy Rookery Nook, directed by Tom Waltz. Set around a bungalow, some scenes of this film were shot in a house that still stands near the Bramber roundabout today. Steyning's cinematic journey continued into the 1950s with the filming of Mr. Drake's Duck in 1951. This was a quirky science fiction starring Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Yolanda Donlan and, of course, John Pertwee. The film tells the humorous tale of an English couple who discover that their duck lays radioactive eggs. The market scenes were shot right here in Steyning, in this very market.
Watch a minute.
Well, we're going to be late for dinner.
Oh, don't be such an old grouch. I'll only be a minute.
Lot 23. Pedigree tubercle-infested Ayrshire.
So behind me is the site of the Railway Hotel. Now, this grand establishment was built in 1881. It's sat up here on this slightly elevated incline, looking over the station imposingly. The hotel, whilst allowing guests to stay, wasn't just about that. It was a social hub, a connectivity point. If we jump back to 1910, we can see tea being taken at the hotel, with the local brass band in attendance, in full uniform, of course. The railway wasn't just about business and commuters. They also ran a lot of trips as well. Do you remember when we went to see Type Tom down in Bognor, and he reprinted that magnificent handbill for us, talking about the Moonlit Walk? Now imagine that. You've booked on that trip, you've come here to Steyning, and you're staying at the beautiful Railway Hotel. Now we've managed to find a review of that trip by one of the guests. Now picture this, a nighttime walk under the stars led by none other than a chap called Mr. Barfoot heading over the South Downs. The plan? A bit of a midnight adventure, right? But of course, in good old British fashion, the weather had other ideas. Instead of clear skies, they got a mist so thick it blotted out the moon, and, to top it all off, they missed the sunrise. So after a good 12 miles of wandering in the dark, our poor frozen group trudged back just in time for breakfast, cold and tired, without so much as a glimpse of what they'd come for. Nothing like a moonlit stroll in the English countryside, eh? Unfortunately, like many historic buildings, the Railway Hotel just couldn't stop the march of time. It struggled on until 1974, but with its main source of revenue gone, i.e. the railway, the site soon closed and was redeveloped for housing. The Railway Inn, nestled away here on Jarvis Lane, may look like an unassuming building from the outside, but it is steeped in history, dating back to the 1700s. In a previous life, it served hospitality and a few quirks to the good people of Steyning and Bramber. Originally, the inn was two separate buildings, likely including a former farmhouse at the rear. Now, over the years, the inn became known for its lively atmosphere and its slightly infamous nickname, the Bum Clink. Oh, and speaking of pubs, did you know? In 1920, the world-renowned Guinness Company came to Steyning looking for somewhere to brew its stout. They had a look at the former Steyning brewery site, which of course had burnt down, and they discovered that the water in the Bradbourne River, which ran down Dog Lane, was absolutely perfect for their product. There was just one small problem. Literally, the amount of water flowing down the river was nowhere near enough to meet production, and therefore, alas, Steyning missed out on this fantastic opportunity. Could you just imagine that, though? My goodness! My Guinness! Brewed in Steyning.
I'm delighted to be with Susie Acton, who remembers using the Steyning Line. Hello.
Hello.
So what do you remember then about using the railway line?
Well, I could hear the train coming from a long way off. I used to sort of hear it when it left Henfield, more or less. And when it got to Steyning, it would always need a fill up of water. I would rush from my house in Castle Way and jump on it with a few friends and some of the boys that went to school in Brighton. And that was quite exciting.
You were at a girls' school.
All girls.
So you used to meet boys on the train?
Yeah, it's the only time you saw them.
I hope there wasn't any naughty behaviour.
Good Lord, no. Only stupid stuff like throwing hats out the window and climbing in the luggage rack.
Of course. And how long did the railway journey take to get
It was about 25 minutes from Steyning to Brighton.
Wow.
And then walked to
memories.
school from there. Yes, it was really nice. My friends and I, we'd go skating when there was a skating ring there, and we'd use the train for the ease of it, really.
Did anyone in your family work on the railways?
I think it was my great-great-uncle, George Gatlin, was a photograph of him looking very smart, and all his staff looking very smart. So he was very involved.
Now, the railway line closed in 1966, and clearly you were a very young girl
Absolutely.
at the time. What do you remember of that last day?
I remember it happening and my dad getting quite excited that he was going to go on this last trip, getting a ticket, and me thinking, what's all the fuss about? You know, it's only a railway. Because at that time, I didn't realise the historical impact of any of it, really.
So the museum is behind me. There's St Andrew's Church, and I'm making my way to our next pit stop here in Steyning, which is the White Horse Hotel and Pub. And speaking of pubs, that's just reminded me about a story I wanted to tell you about singing navvies. Now, navvies are the construction workers who build the railway lines. Huge groups of people who would travel all around the country building the lines in the Victorian era that were being constructed at a terrific pace. And they enjoyed their work almost as much as they enjoyed their pints in the evening. Now, one evening here in Steyning, a group of the navvies probably had a little bit too much to drink, and this gave them the courage to start singing out on the streets. This singing was led by a wonderfully named Irishman called Paddy O'Connell, who had a powerful tenor voice, and he led the group singing sea shanties and folk songs. Now, this drew quite a lot of attention, and this impromptu concert started to gather a bit of a crowd. Now, the residents, some of the residents were a bit sort of unsure about this. They were a little bit well-to-do and looked down on this kind of thing as unsuitable activity for Steyning. However, because the crowds were gathering and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, there was a lot of foot tapping and people were joining in, and eventually this became rather legendary, the Singing Navvies of Steyning. Great example of the camaraderie between the construction workers and the locals of the time. Nestled in the heart of Steyning, the White Horse was first identified as an inn in 1614, linked to the cloth merchant William Holland, who was also a supporter of Steyning Grammar School. Over time, the White Horse has had several names, including the Half Moon in the 1690s and later Whites, but thankfully it went back to the original name, the White Horse. Now, the White Horse was a key stopping point on the route between London and Brighton. It was somewhere you could stable your horse, and in fact the old stables behind the hotel are where the pub is today. One other small fact that is less well known about the White Horse Inn is that it was under the employ of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway for many years once the railway appeared, as an agency for running a horse coach network, picking people up from local stops and unconnected villages, much like a modern bus, and then shuttling them to and from the railway station from outside the White Horse. So it was quite a bustling centre of activity and connected to our railway at several points in its history. But why are we talking about pubs all of a sudden? If you've just tuned in, this isn't Tracing the Ales. Well, there is a very important railway connection, which we'll come to shortly. On this spot here was once the grand facade of the hotel or inn. But one Sunday morning in March 1949, fire ravaged the building. Fire brigades from Steyning, Worthing and surrounding areas fought the blaze under the command of County Brigade Officer W.J. Bride, but despite their efforts, fire gutted the hotel, leaving only the front wall standing. But after the fire, they decided not to rebuild the hotel after all. The costs were just considered too extortionate, something around £30,000, and instead they converted the stables into the pub that it is today. Now, the agreement to construct what eventually was to become the Steyning Line was actually signed here in 1856. And even though they didn't realise it at the time, this led to a partnership and eventual takeover of the plan by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway. Hi there, can I have an orange juice and packet of crisps, please? Oh, and as I'm in the zone of 1856 when the railway agreement was signed, could I pay 1856 prices, please?
Okay, that will be threepence.
Threepence, bargain. Now, key people involved in this momentous decision included local landowners and also representatives of the towns along the proposed route. There's fourpence, keep the change. This, of course, would lead to a boost in the economy and also improving transport links, which was much needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Under the supervision of respected contractor Mr. Furbank, construction of the Steyning Line actually started in the summer of 1859. You may remember in episode 1 we mentioned how well Mr. Furbank did in his job. The work was intense, particularly near the River Ada, where lots of chalk had to be brought in to act as foundations to take the line through the boggy land between Steyning and Henfield. Now, originally, the first phase was to connect Shoreham to Partridge Green, but the plans, of course, were to eventually extend the line towards Horsham. Despite the challenges, they did really well, and by late 1860 they'd reached Partridge Green. This was largely thanks to over 200 workers who'd been employed to build the line, often referred to as navvies, many of whom lived in mud huts. However, bringing this railway to life wasn't without its hurdles. Another significant meeting took place at the White Horse Inn on March the 28th, 1861. This gathering saw George Breach, a well-known businessman, play a vital role. Now, Breach was really important because there were a lot of landowners along the line who were reluctant to sell. And of course, without every piece of the jigsaw, there would be no Steyning Line. And it was Breach's persistence in persuading them all that meant that we actually ended up with a Steyning Line. And that important piece of paper can be seen to this day in the Steyning Museum. There was one particular troublesome landowner called Thomas Medland who was very reluctant to agree, but happily an impromptu meeting at a local pub changed his mind. So troublesome Thomas Medland was in the pub being plied with drinks by Breach and eventually, probably while under the influence, hastily signed his consent on a beer-soaked napkin. This informal agreement later became a key moment in securing the railway's path. Another pivotal figure in the railway was the Mayor of Steyning, Robert Caplin. Now, he was originally sceptical about the railway, but he had a change of heart after a meeting at the town hall. Robert Caplin had misunderstood a load of technical documentation, and reading this out, he made a bit of a fool of himself. So, in order to hide his embarrassment, he hastily changed his mind, agreed to it, and became a staunch supporter of the railway. So, had it been not for his mistake, things may have turned out very differently. Now, by July the 1st, 1861, the railway was finally finished, and this was met by great celebration in the town. A procession, led by the Steyning Brass Band, went from the town centre to the newly opened Steyning railway station. Now, the platform was adorned with flags, and the bells of St Andrews rang out in celebration. Back then, photography was in its infancy. It was very rare and very expensive, and sadly, there are no pictures of the Steyning Line opening. However, we have got these illustrations. I've just spotted someone who I'd like to have a chat with, and I think you'll find her fascinating. Now, we're very lucky that we get some amazing guests on this programme, and I'm delighted to be sharing a table at the White Horse with Dr. Janet Pennington. Thank you so much for having a chat with us, Janet. And you are an amazing historian. You've even got a PhD in Sussex inns and taverns, haven't you? So how perfect for this episode. This is amazing. So, Janet, this has got a significance to the railway, which we explore in this episode. But what was Steyning like as a town in the middle of the 19th century?
I think from a lot of books and sort of diary entries I've read, Steyning was quite a quiet place, but it was very, very busy on market days, which could have been twice a week or once a week. And there was an enormous fair for animals, agricultural fair, I suppose you would say, once a year in October.
And the White Horse that we're in now, its fortunes have changed over the years because this actual bit used to be the stables.
That's right.
I understand.
Yes.
What is the oldest part of this building?
Well, we're nearly sitting in it. It's just the angled part here. If you go outside, you'll see there's a pump and there's a well, which is covered up, well, sort of glass. You can see through it a bit. That's the oldest part that remains from the fire, the awful fire that happened on the 19th of March, 1949. But before that, there would have been a timber frame building in early times.
Was it quite common for people to come into a pub or an inn to do their dealings, or was...
Yes, you would have had to, say on that market day, you were supposed to pay a fee, but quite a lot of business went on perhaps upstairs in one of the rooms in the White Horse or the Checker Inn a bit further down, and sort of the tax wouldn't have been paid. But I think there's been people on the lookout for that. But certainly, yes, a lot of business done in here.
And finally, Janet, do you remember the old railway line?
Yes, I do remember it. And apparently I went on it when I was very small. So my mother told me that I haven't got any memory. What I do remember coming here, not really connected with the railway, but the day after the fire of 1949. That's a very strong memory.
Oh, gosh, that must have been devastating.
The smell of the burnt timbers, and some of them were still smouldering, and I was standing across the road here with my dad.
Funny how society accepted so much waste, sending good machines away to die. Inefficient rubbish, relics from the age of coal. Someday soon their ghosts will ask us why. For funnily, the experts who made diesel power the king thought they'd have cheap oil evermore. Techno-heart efficiency was bludgeoned through the day. Those sensible said, keep our steam in store. Now they're gone. Now they're gone. There's a funny kind of legend living on. Empty now the scrapyard, but for lines of barren tracks, but for winter's breezes through the grass. Pass a herd to whistle on a still and frozen night that a golden opportunity has passed.
Central to the market's operation were large warehouses built near the station. Buildings like this one. Originally one of those warehouses was not only used to store goods, but also for the sale of goods, crucial for the railway operation. Over there, well, that was not an original building, and it stands on the site of the old station main building, but it's nice they've tried to keep the style of the railway. This warehouse is closely linked to H.J. Burton's son, who used it for auctions primarily, selling anything from livestock all the way through to furniture. I've been lucky enough to be invited to go inside and take a look. Coming along? We're in the old auction house. I'm very, very fortunate and very thankful to Matthew Howard. Wonderful to meet you, Matthew. Thank you so much. So we're standing in your kitchen.
Yep.
And I'm just admiring this window.
And I think the fan is that would be part of the original warehouse.
Wow. I'm standing here now looking out at this row of garages thinking just beyond that there was a railway. Do you ever get that impression?
Not least because the bypass is the line of the railway.
Yes.
And it ain't a steam train, but it's certainly a car. You're kind of conscious of that all of the time.
What's it like living in the old auction house?
I came to Steyning as a painter, so I had a studio on the top floor, and amazing. So, but I love Steyning. You know, I came here from London. I love it. I still nearly 25 years on, can't quite believe that I'm here. It's extraordinary.
Have you ever found any bits and pieces, you know, of the old auction house or from the past when you've been...
I'd like to say yes, but the answer is no. I mean, that would be very cool, but I don't think we have.
So let's go back then in time to the first public train service that left Steyning railway station. This was on the 1st of July 1861, and at 2:25 in the afternoon, the steam locomotive, adorned with decorative flags, left Steyning railway station heading to Partridge Green via Henfield. With the band playing at every station along the way, the excitement reached a peak as the train pulled into Partridge Green, where the entire village had turned out to witness the spectacle. The newly appointed station master, Mr. Guilford, previously a guard on the South Coast Line for 15 years, was there to welcome the train. Amongst those gathered at Partridge Green was Mr. William Carter, born in 1779, who had never seen a train before. Upon seeing the locomotive for the first time, Carter remarked that it was the strangest beast he had ever laid eyes on, and was later seen cautiously approaching the engine, muttering that it was noisy enough to wake the dead. Villagers affectionately nicknamed the train Carter's Beast, a name that stuck for some time. Now, later that evening, festivities returned right here at the White Horse Inn with a grand dinner. Local dignitaries attended, along with railway workers and men who'd constructed the line. Mr. C.T. Steinhauer, a senior official from the BRC, which was the Brighton Railway Company, which incidentally eventually became part of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, praised the community's efforts and expressed his gratitude for the warm welcome he'd received. The atmosphere was joyous, with speeches, toasts and plenty of laughter. Now, the story of the Steyning Line is so much more than the engineering and the transport. It's about the local community coming together, overcoming the challenges and celebrating the success of the railway. And the lovely thing about it is that it all started here at the White Horse Inn. Now, I've had a right old adventure here in Steyning, so much so that I thought I might have a break, so I've got some lunch. And in actual fact, I'm going to ask you to take a break now as well. Now, what do you mean by this, you're thinking? Well, when we first started talking about tracing the rails, we imagined 6 fairly concise episodes, one for each station along the old original Steyning Line. But as we've delved into the history of this old railway line, things have just got bigger and bigger and bigger. We've uncovered so many stories and wonderful history to tell you about that we decided that we didn't want to leave any of it out. This has also been made all the more wonderful by your contributions. Your photographs, your memories, your films and your stories have become a very important part of this big adventure. So much so that the episodes have just got so big we thought we ought to chop the Steyning episode in half. So do take a break now. We hope you've enjoyed this part. And the good thing is that the rest of the Steyning adventure has already been recorded, so you won't have to wait too long. There is another thing we might ask as well. We've really enjoyed making Tracing the Rails, but it is self-funded. And if you've enjoyed it, then we would love to have your support. Go to our website, tracingtherails.com, and why not consider becoming one of our Patreon subscribers? Your subscriptions could help future editions of Tracing the Rails, not only on the Steyning Line, but maybe for future series as well. So sit back while I have my sandwich and join us next time as we continue the Steyning adventure.
Why